do with New York City and especially Bloomingdale history. So how's the weather there in New York?
Oh, it's fine. It's in the 60s here.
Okay. Yeah, about the same here. I think it's 68 where I am. It's a little bit cool. But, oh. And Julian, where are you right now?
I'm in Midtown near Columbus Circle on 8th Avenue.
Okay. Okay. Fabulous. Wow.
Julian, you want to tell us a little bit about what's in the background right now?
Yeah. Basically, as I was looking at all these photos, I would just keep a folder and I would just drag anything that was interesting, usually just photographically interesting. There's something interesting going on in this folder, and then I'd make this my screensaver. So what you're seeing is what I've had as my screensaver for the past couple of years. Like here's Rockefeller Plaza that was new at the time.
Yeah, I'm gonna put some emphasis on top of it. Yeah, these are photos, Julian. Maybe I'm stating the obvious that most people have not seen, even though they're publicly available. You really don't see them unless someone like you brings them, makes them available to the wide general public, and that's why the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group really appreciates this stuff, because it's just popularizing historical information and images that we'd all just love to see all the time. So,
yeah, I mean,
there's a lot of
the city is responsible for making these available online, but I'm happy to make them much easier to browse.
Yeah.
And yeah,
that's
I mean,
right.
There are also like 700,000 of them, so have to spend a while staring at them to find some interesting gems.
Well, those of us that deal with our local history all the time are used to the kind of same old images over and over and over again, which are fabulous. But the stuff that's down in New York City Municipal Archives puts a lot of it to shame, just the sheer volume of stuff, which is what you've dealt with. So again, if you're just joining us now, welcome to our Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group program about New York City or Bloomingdale in the 1940s. Julian may tell you that our guest speaker, Julian Boylan, may tell you that these images were made 1939, 40, 41, and there's some 700,000 plus of those. Until recently, not all that easy to get to without going down to the municipal archives in the old Surrogates Court down on Chambers Street. People like Gil Tauber, who will be speaking tonight, and myself would go down there from time to time looking for stuff. But Julian's made it much more accessible in a very creative way that we'll hear about. So are we getting close to 5:30?
Yeah, so we hit 5:30, and I just wanted to remind people that if they had questions, we have the Q&A section at the end of the chat. I will also be answering any questions that I can through the chat, but most of them will be directed at the end of the presentation. But yeah,
that's
it is
great,
5:30,
Michael.
and we can start.
It's 5:30, so maybe we'll have a 1-minute grace period here, but I'll use the time to again welcome anyone who's tuned in to this program, Bloomingdale in the 1940s. It's kind of tailored specifically for our local history and for residents of Bloomingdale that are very familiar with our area, tailored specifically by our featured speaker this evening, Julian Boylan, who I'll introduce in a very short while. And you're definitely in the right place. This will be a wonderful program. Michael Gonzalez, who's one of our Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group members, just reminded us all that if you have any questions, you could either save them for the end. We'll allow some time for Q&A, but you could post them on Zoom. I'm sure many of you have become more facile with this, or you could post something in the chat, and Michael will be looking at that constantly, and we'll either answer at the end or we'll answer during the program as appropriate. Michael will handle most of that. And after we introduced Julian, he'll talk for a little while, tell you all about himself and what he's done here. And then Gil Tauber will go through our photographs one by one, and we're going to contrast 1940 with today at more than 20 select sites, which I think will be very, very interesting. I'll toss in an occasional comment or two. I think with no further ado, let's begin. And let me tell you that we've got two programs, at least two programs, maybe three, but I'll tell you about two that are coming up. One is on Thursday, April 15th. We've talked about this for years, but we finally pulled it together. And some other people in our Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, there's about 14 of us, have coordinated a program that we'll do by Zoom with some live music on Latin music in the neighborhood. And boy, is it rich and interesting. And in this particular program, we'll have some live music, so that'll make it even more rich and interesting. And then on May 4th, which is a Tuesday evening, Andrew Alpern, who's kind of a legendary author of New York City histories, especially apartment buildings and holdout buildings. He's written, considered the definitive history of the Dakota apartment building, but his recent book has been getting much attention on portals of famous buildings, famous residential buildings in New York City. And he too has managed to tailor that to our neighborhood. So what a program that's going to be. I'm Jim Mackin. Again, I'm one of 14 members of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. You'll hear my name, you'll hear Gil Tauber's name as a presenter tonight, and of course, Michael Gonzalez, who's coordinating most of the evening's activities. I'm way out in California on vacation. In fact, I'm curiously enough about 6 miles away from a town called Julian. And so that's a perfect segue to our featured speaker this evening. Julian Boylan is a software engineer of the first order. He does some spectacular stuff. His resume is really quite impressive, but he's going to go down in immediate history for putting together a spectacular interactive map of New York City that features 700,000 plus photographs of buildings in the city. And those photographs, he may explain some of this, but those photographs were taken to make sure that the city collected taxes on all of the properties in the city. And so that's what he's going to tell you about, and hopefully he'll tell you a little bit about ourselves. Julian, are you ready to go?
Sure, thank you, Jim. Let me switch over here.
Thank you.
All right, is that slide coming up okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
There we go. So thank you, Jim. I'm Julian, and I built the 1940s.nyc site, which you can go browse right now if you want. Check it out. I know there was already some questions about, can you see this address? Can you see that address? Yes, they are on a map. My name is Julian. I'm a software engineer. I have no particular background in history, although my mother does work at the Smithsonian and museums, and she's the one who tipped me off to these photos when they came out. I moved to New York in 2014 after school. I'm originally from the DC and Maryland area. And in New York, I've lived in Ridgewood, in Manhattan Valley, on the Upper West Side for the longest time, in Park Slope, and now I moved to Midtown a couple of months ago. I've worked for Squarespace, which is the website builder, and right now I work for a little startup called Free Will. If you ever need to make a will for free, Free Will, we have them. And to be clear, I have no affiliation with the Department of Records or the Municipal Archives. I just sort of decided to build this on my own and hope that they wouldn't sue me, but I think we're okay. a little bit about the photos themselves. They were taken in 1939 and through the 1940s through the tax department with support from the WPA. And they tried to take a photo of every building in the city. And what they would do is print these photos out on cards, and they would paste them to the back of the property cards that they kept in the tax department's records. So on the front of the card is whatever information is useful for assessing tax on a property. And then on the back, you would be able to see the picture of the property. By the 1980s, these photos were getting pretty out of date. So they repeated the process, this time in color. Then in the 80s photos, they scanned these and put them on an interactive laser disc, which was the high technology of the time for research. And you can see these laser disc stills on the Municipal Archive site. Unfortunately, they look pretty much like junk because they are low resolution video stills. But I believe the city is working on scanning the original negatives of the 80s photos. So we should be able to have those soon. Also in the 80s, the city made a backup copy of the 40s photos. But even that copy by the 2000s was deteriorating. And in 2015, the city decided that it was possible and cost effective to digitize the photos. So in 2018, the Municipal Archives finally released these digital photos scanned from the original negative. But what they also did was attach metadata to each of these photos. The first piece of metadata is what I call the BBL, what's known as the BBL, the borough, block, and lot number that identifies each tax lot in the city. And that's what the guys are holding up on the signs in the photos. But the other thing that they did was type in an address for most of these photos. And to do that required going back to the old tax maps and trying to determine what the address was. And this really must have been a lot of work. So thank you for the archives for doing that. The site that the archives provides does work. You can go and type in an address if you want to see a specific photo, but you have to type it in exactly. If you know your borough, block, and lot number, you can type in block equals and lot equals, and the photo will come up. But this is not really fun. What I wanted to do was just sort of time travel and explore around. So in order to do that, I had to take these photos and put them on a map that was easier to work with. There was some prior work. There's 80s.nyc, which does something very similar, although they took a somewhat different approach because of how those 80s photos are smaller. And I did it just differently. So I'll talk a bit about taking these photos and how to put them on a map, since I get asked that a lot. Scraping is a term in computing that's basically like downloading data from a website, usually without coordinating with that website. So my program that scrapes the photos off of the site, this is how it works. It pages through each collection of data, where a collection is, each collection is a borough, and each item in that collection is a photo in that borough. So then I have to process each item on each page. The first step is to clean up the data. There's a lot of mistakes, just kind of nonsense sometimes, like block numbers that are way out of range, a couple different ways that they have of categorizing what an outtake is, splitting out like ranges of addresses. My favorite typo that they have is clearly some Excel accident where they'll have an address range like 1 to 25 Broadway. But what it actually says is January 25th Broadway, which is not what they meant. So fixing that kind of stuff up. The next step is to download the largest photo that's available, the preview photo. This isn't the full resolution. To get that, you have to pay for it. And please go do if there's a photo that you like. This is just the preview that's available freely on the site. And then once that's downloaded, I upload it to my web server, and that kicks off another program that will compress it to a somewhat smaller size and make a thumbnail version. This speeds up the load time, so you can click through all the photos really quickly and browse around much more easily. Then I upload the metadata from the site that's been cleaned up, the borough, block, and lot number, the address, and put that in the database. But then the heart of the program is the geocoding, determining where it goes on the map, what the latitude and longitude is. So this is just basically trial and error. Try a few different processes. The first thing I try is using a file called Pluto, which is available from the city. This is the primary land use and tax lot output file. This is basically a giant spreadsheet that you can get. Each row is a tax lot in the city. And so you can look up a row by the block and lot number. And then another column is the center of the lot, the latitude and longitude of the center of the lot. This is actually only released near the end of when I was working on this. The the latitude longitude part. So if that tax lot still exists and hasn't moved since the 40s, this works really well. Unfortunately, a lot of stuff has moved. So if there's been a high rise that's been constructed and it's combined a couple lots together, then this doesn't work. So the next thing I try is a geocoding service that's free from the city called NYC GeoSearch. NYC GeoSearch is the same thing that's used on my site. If you start typing an address in the search box, then it'll autocomplete it. That's using NYC GeoSearch. So NYC GeoSearch takes an address as input and they'll return some search results and where those search results are on a map. That works if the address still exists. If the address is gone, this doesn't work anymore. The next thing I use is the great geocoding service from Google Maps. This works very well. One thing that it can do in particular is interpolate an address. So if the address is gone, but it can figure out sort of where it would have been on the street. Unfortunately, this does cost money if you use it too much. So that's why I put it last. This is not a perfect process at all. I do have one way to do some sanity checking, which is, did it at least wind up in the right borough? Because there was a class of errors that was like Broadway in Brooklyn versus Broadway in Manhattan. I did the Manhattan photos. Why are there a bunch of photos in Brooklyn? So this will just filter those out. But it's still not perfect. As I say on my site, this is not magic. This is basically a bunch of best effort attempts. A few things that can go wrong are I can't geocode the photo at all. Or sometimes multiple photos will wind up on top of each other, and so you can only see one of them. Or it's just wrong, and there are definitely photos that are just wrong. So I'll save those geocoding results out to the database. And here's a little post from my Instagram of the program running. That's about the speed it goes at. I developed this on just Manhattan first. And then before I decided to launch the site, I could just process the other boroughs pretty easily. It took about 5 hours-ish to run on Manhattan. And then Queens and Brooklyn a little bit longer. There it goes. I think the main trick to this program is getting it to be robust. There's a lot that can go wrong when you're processing almost 700,000 items. So I don't want to sit and stare at it all day. It needs to sort of back off and retry if something goes wrong, or just record that something went wrong and move on. And there are all the points on a map. A lot of people ask me about this map. This map is nothing special at all. This is just a modern map that I customized with some colors and fonts. I tried to imagine what would a website look like if it were built in 1940. One source of inspiration was this 1948 subway map. I toned down the colors a bit. They're pretty gaudy. And then I also added some layers on top. So in addition to that modern map, there are some historic layers. So if you zoom in on Manhattan, you'll see this old, very precise map showing all the tax lots, precise building outlines, and even the names of some of the occupants. Like in this photo, there's a school and there's a church, St. John the Divine Church. So where did this come from? I looked all over for maps that I could use, and I tried various different overlays. This came from the New York Public Library's collection. It's from 1930. They also have ones from 1956 and 1916. By 1956, there had been a lot of construction, and it had changed quite a bit, so that didn't quite match up. And obviously 1916 was interesting, but pretty early. The 1956 and 1916 ones were already processed and laid on top of a map. But for this one, it was the same sort of problem as placing the photos. How do you take this and put it on a modern map? And to do that, I, again, scraped down all the photos and the metadata, and then uploaded them to a nice tool called mapwarper.net. Mapwarper.net works very well, but is also pretty clunky. But it does what it's supposed to do. You take each photo and you just sort of click points in the photo, like maybe the middle of street corners or something, and then you click the same points on a modern map, and it will warp the image so that it lines up with the map. And then you cut around the map so to cut it out from the plate. So there were 186 map tiles, so it was just very tedious, long process. And I got to see every block in Manhattan. some of the things that I found that were fun were you can see where the bathrooms were in Penn Station. And I didn't quite know the extent of the rail yards on the west side. It's a lot. The other overlay that I decided to put on this map is if you click the little button in the lower right-hand corner, you'll get an aerial view. This aerial view is from 1951 and comes from the city's website, maps.nyc.gov. They have many other maps that you can go through and see aerial views over time. The other option I could have used before this one, before 1951, was 1924, but that seemed kind of too early. But still, you can go on there and see how things have changed over time. I think that's pretty much an overview of what I built. Jim and Gil will talk more about the photos in the area. And also, I'm curious what everyone wants to know. So please put questions in the Q&A, and then we can guide things from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. I cannot convey strongly enough how thrilled we all were when your interactive map became accessible. And just to really hone in on the significance of this, all you had to do on your interactive map was go to your block, your street corner, your address, and if you saw a dot there, you simply clicked on that and it showed a photo of what was there in 1940. And Gil, that's what you're going to start to talk about for the items that we've selected to contrast 1940 with today. Are you good to go?
I think I'm good to go. Let me see, Michael, do I start to screen share now? Do I just click on screen share?
Yes, you should be able to.
All right, and let's see. Okay, and let me, that's behind my, all right, we're on screen share. Can you see that?
If you want to start
Yep.
the slideshow, but yes, we can see.
All right, and now, let's see, I probably have to,
I think up on the top space bar where it says slideshow.
top spacebar slideshow.
Right. Click on that.
Sorry, I don't see it. I see
See,
you are screen sharing, new share, poise, annotate. Oh, where it says more?
No. Okay. Try going to the bottom. You'll have a picture of an
Oh,
image.
wait, no, this is working. This is working.
Perfect.
All right, I hope
But you want to put it.
full screen. Let's see.
Yeah, it's tripping that little all the way on the top to the left of 1940.
I think the zoom control bar is on top of the button that you want to click. If you can like drag the zoom thing out of the way, it's under there. It's under the search box in the.
Oh, yeah. And so what do I put on? What do I click on?
Go.
Yeah. Show small, show thumbnail video. Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Julian?
I think you have to do it from your end.
Oh,
There
okay,
you go.
there we
There you
are.
go. I got you going.
Thank you, Julian. Okay. So this is the landing page. If you when you go into Julian's website, you start with this page. The photographers back in 1940, you know, this huge archive of photographs is mostly these guys holding up a sign with the block and lot number. But here and there, you'll find there were some odd pictures that they took, which just showed people in them. There were portraits. Some of them were the photographers themselves. This is a particularly touching portrait of a young boy standing in front of a building, which I think is in Brooklyn. But that's where it begins. So for our own neighborhood, we'll start here with the building at the a building at the southwest corner of 96th Street and Broadway. And this, of course, was back in the days when it was legal for cigarette companies to advertise on billboards. This building, two-story building, had a variety of shops in the second story. And the one here with a sign outside is a tennis shop. The little building on the left is now a McDonald's. And I can remember before it was a McDonald's, it was a Rikers or one of those other lunch counter type restaurants. If anybody remembers what it was, please let me know. In any case, this was from at least the 70s up into the early 2000s. The second floor was a Latin nightclub. And maybe next month when we have that Latin music program, we might hear some more about that or the music that was played there. Anyway, this building was torn down late last year, and on the right you see a building that is at this moment under construction, an apartment house. On the north side of 96th Street, you had two theaters called the Riverside, the relatively low building on the left, and the Riviera, which was in the base of the taller building on the right here. On the upper floors of that building, there was a second theater that was just for movies. Both the Riviera and the Riverside were built for vaudeville. And above the Riviera was something called the Japanese Roof Garden, which was strictly for movies and was, for showing in the open air in the summertime, which was logical back in the days before air conditioning. Both of these buildings were built by William Fox, who was primarily a theater owner, but whose name survives in such things as Fox News, Fox TV, and 20th Century Fox. On the right is a building that replaced it. There was quite a saga to this. There was a proposal to build a 35-story apartment tower with an Alexander's department store in the lower floors. And after about 10 years of litigation, this project was finally realized, but minus the department store. Here we have the northeast corner of 104th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. The building at the corner is the old PS 54, which was built shortly after the Civil War as what was called Ward School 54. And it was in use for nearly a century into the 1950s. And it was torn down for what you see at the right. The low building in the background is PS 145, the Bloomingdale School. And in front of it is the Bloomingdale Playground. To the left is what was the Grosvenor House, a settlement house, later taken over by the YMCA, and currently being renovated as a.
Yeah, I might just add. The old
Yes.
before.
Not hearing you, Jim.
Oh, sorry. I'll try to speak a little louder if you could hear me. The old
Yeah, I can hear you now.
PS-54 was going to be the site of the Strauss Park dedication in 1913 had it rained.
Oh,
Okay. If it had not rained, and it didn't, all of the dignitaries were in Strauss Park. Again, this is 1913. And indeed, there are a number of students from PS 54 who symbolically walked in front of the Augustus Lukeman statue memory, which is in the park today, and they placed flowers in the waterbed in front of it to evoke the spiritual idea of the way the Strauss, Isidore and Ida Strauss passed away. But so PS 54, the old building, actually factors into some Strauss history in our neighborhood.
Uh-huh. Okay. In the left-hand picture, you know, where the old school is, you'll see down in the middle of the block, the tower of a church. And that is the church in this photo, the Grace Methodist Church, which was originally on this site in 1870 and then was rebuilt in, I believe, 1894. And it was quite a handsome church with a lot of art and stained glass and wood carving. It burned down in 1983, and it was a disastrous fire. The building was totally destroyed. Now, the congregation at that time determined to rebuild, and it was by that time a predominantly Hispanic congregation. So they decided, because of the, it sounds like a perennial story, because of the shortage of affordable housing in the neighborhood, they decided to build a relatively modern and simple church, which you see on the left, and the rest of the property they used for a 10-story apartment building with affordable housing, which is what you see there today. You see on the left here, two buildings which have an odd shape, and that's because they're at an angle to the street. They sit on the land that was formerly the right-of-way of the original Croton Aqueduct, which came down Amsterdam Avenue and then angled off to the southeast to a route near Columbus Avenue, which we'll see later. And between, about 102nd and 94th or so, it actually, because of the dip in the ground there, you know, at 96th Street, it actually came out of the ground and ran on a series of arches up to 50 feet high above ground. But here it was still underground, just approaching, coming out of the ground. The buildings were demolished in about the 1960s when the Jewish Home for the Aged was enlarging and building its newer buildings on 106th Street. But you can still see that curious angle created by the aqueduct right-of-way in the building on the left, which is, if you look at it on the map, is almost triangular. Now, I mentioned the Jewish Home for the Aged. That was originally the home for aged and infirm Hebrews. When the aqueduct was enlarged in the 1870s, the water system expanded and made it possible to have sewers and water mains on this part of the Upper West Side. And that's really what made it possible to have urban type development. And among the first developers who took advantage of this were institutions. And the building on the far left in the old photo is the Home for Aged and Infirm Hebrews. It was built here in 1872, just at the time those new water mains were being put in. The lower part of that building still exists. If you look in the photo on the right, you can see the upper floors were removed at the time of the expansion of the nursing home, by which time it had become the Jewish Home for the Aged. And you can see this arch bricked in arch over here is the same arch that you see here. And this, remnant of the old building is now used for various housekeeping and utilities purposes. Now, the Jewish Home for the Aged wasn't the only institution that came at that time to take advantage of the new infrastructure. On the north side of 106, you had the Little Sisters of the Poor Home for the Aged. And that was there until the 1970s, until the early 70s, I believe, when new, stricter fire regulations and so forth made it impractical to either maintain or renovate the old home. So the nuns had the building torn down, and then several years later, they sold the vacant property to an organization, a very important one on the Upper West Side now, called wait, I'll think of it in a moment, but in any case, what they built, what's now known as Red Oak, that apartment building on the north side of 106 between Amsterdam and Columbus, which is affordable housing for the elderly and handicapped. The organization is the West Side Federation for Senior and Supportive Housing. I hope I've got that right. And they operate a number of other projects around the Upper West Side, including the Marseille is one of their buildings. Here is yet another nonprofit, charitable institution that came to the Upper West Side in the late 19th century, the Protestant Half-Orphan Asylum. And if it's hard to visualize what a half-orphan is, it's a child who may have a surviving parent, but that parent, for one reason or another, because of illness or just sheer poverty, is unable to support that child. This organization was started up in 1835 in what's now Whitehall Street. And after a number of different iterations, it came here in the 1890s. And again, like a number of other nonprofit institutions, in the late 20th century, the buildings no longer met, fire and related regulations. It was given up by the Half-Orphan Asylum, which is now emerged into, let me see, Graham, Graham Wyndham Child Services. Some of you may be familiar with that name. The building was used for a while as a yeshiva, and then was torn down and replaced by this townhouse type development, which fills the block between 104th and 105th Street on Manhattan Avenue. And that was built by another very important organization on the Upper West Side. And again, I hope I've got the name right here, the Manhattan Valley Development Corporation, which was been responsible for a lot of renovation of and creation of affordable housing on the Upper West Side. Now, if you go a few blocks north, this was the Manhattan Photoplay Theater. By the early 1900s, the Upper West Side supported a good number of movie theaters. And this was one of the earliest fully enclosed theaters. But in addition to an auditorium, it had like the one we saw down at 96th Street. It had an open air seating area on the roof for use in warm weather. And this movie theater was opened about 1914 or so. In the 1950s, it was converted into a church, which still owns the building and still, still carries on as a church. That's the Arco di Refugio church. On the left here, the building with the arched window is a remnant of the enlarged aqueduct of the late 19th century. This is the where that big stone arch was that I mentioned that carried the original aqueduct over the 96th Street Valley. Later, when the aqueduct was rebuilt under Columbus Avenue, the aqueduct authorities or commission had a pumping station and water tower here. And the water tower was taken down in the 30s, but this remained at the time of this photo, this pumping station. On the right, you see where this was, and basically the site, the right of way of the original aqueduct, which is now within Park West Village. And here we are still in Park West Village. The photo on the left is of a building that was built for the Pasteur Institute. And this was the American branch or arm of the institute founded by Louis Pasteur in Paris in 1890. And its main focus was research and treatment on rabies and tetanus, for which they developed and employed vaccines. And it also played an important role in promoting the pasteurization of milk. Well, this was built in 1893, but the Pasteur Institute didn't hang on to it for long because it turned out that a lot of their work was carried out in an experimental farm in Rockland County and some other locations in the city. So this, within a few years, had become an apartment hotel. And in the 50s, it was torn down for Park West Village, and that's the building at the new building you see here. That was 382, is now 382 Central Park West. At the northern end of Park West Village, there was another medical institution. This was a reconstruction hospital at the southwest corner of 100th Street and Central Park West. And that's kind of an interesting institution. It got its start in the 1890s, a few blocks away from here, as a training institution for nurses run by the Red Cross. And then the Spanish-American War came along, and the nurses were kind of drafted to care for wounded soldiers in the Spanish-American War, which they turned out to be very good at. And after the war, this was relocated here at 100th Street in Central Park West. It was initially called the Park Hospital. After a few further mergers, it became Reconstruction Hospital, and it specialized in surgeries and rehabilitation of people wounded in the war, and also of victims of industrial accidents, of which there were a good many in the early 20th century. In the late 1920s, this was absorbed into yet another hospital, in any case, is now part of NYU Langone, NYU Medical Center. On that site now is the building you see at the right, which is 400 Central Park West. And I would not be surprised if a number of you watching this live in 400 Central Park West. Now on the left, excuse me, in this building is the building of the Lion Brewery. In the 19th century, this was the biggest industry in the Bloomingdale area. At one time, it started in the 1850s, and at one time employed about 2,000 people and covered parts of 3 city blocks in the vicinity of 108th Street and Columbus Avenue. The structure you see at the right is the old 9th Avenue L. Now the brewery, and you could see, even though you only see a bit of it, it was a pretty large building. It struggled through Prohibition, but finally went bankrupt and was torn down and torn down in the 40s. It's steel used for the war effort, the World War II war effort. And after the war, became the site of Booker T. Washington Middle School, which is the building on the right. And referring to we'll see a little more of the 9th Avenue L later, but it was torn down in late 1940, not long after the tax photos were taken. Here is yet another picture of the 9th Avenue L. And this is where you're looking southwest here. And this is where it curves around at 110th Street, where it went just a short distance and then made a left turn up 8th Avenue to the Polo Grounds. And on the right, you can see where the building in the old tax photo, the one at what seems to be the corner, is still there now. And if you look at the building, you can see that it has a very odd shape to accommodate the curve of the elevated. A number of movie theaters were torn down in the urban renewal project that resulted in Frederick Douglass houses. One of these was the Arden, which was at the northwest corner of Columbus Avenue and 103rd. Later in the 1940s, as the neighborhood became largely Hispanic, it changed its name to the Carib. And again, you see the 9th Avenue L tracks up there. It's still the Arden at this point. It was the Carib starting in the 1940s, and it operated into the 1950s, early 1950s, when it was torn down for Frederick Douglass houses, a part of which you see in the color photo at the right. At the northeast corner of Amsterdam and 109th, this building was the art school of the National Academy of Design, an institution that still exists and is one of the oldest cultural institutions in New York. It was founded in 1825 by Asher B. Durand and Thomas Cole and Samuel F.B. Morse, who later on in his spare time invented the telegraph. But he was among the founders of this institution, which had its art school at 109th and Amsterdam Avenue. And that is now the site of this peculiar building. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. Between 109th and 110th on the east side of Amsterdam, which is a Con Edison substation. You see in the old photo further down the block, a large building which was Women's Hospital. Women's Hospital, there you see it. There on the extreme right, that's still part of the National Academy of Design School. The larger building is Women's Hospital, and it was founded in 1855 by Dr. J. Marion Sims, and was the first hospital in the United States and perhaps in the world specifically devoted to women's diseases. It moved here in 1906. That's the date of this building you see in the old photo, on a site that ran through the block to 110th. Eventually, the Women's Hospital merged with St. Luke's, and these buildings were demolished and replaced by what you see at the right, the Cathedral Parkway houses, which were completed in 1975. Here we are back on Broadway, and the building at the left, a movie theater, has its own connection to the Lion Brewery. Back in the 19th century, the Lion Brewery had a 2-acre beer garden on the east side of Columbus Avenue, connected to the brewery building by a bridge over Columbus Avenue. Well, in 1879, when the 9th Avenue L was built, that bridge had to come down. The brewery sold it in the 1890s, but then they built a large new beer hall at the corner of 110th and Broadway. This was the 1890s. And just after Columbia University had relocated to where it is now. And in addition to selling beer to thirsty Columbia students, this establishment called the Lion Palace had music and dancing, and in warm weather, a rooftop theater with vaudeville acts. In fact, that whole stretch of Columbus Avenue, of 110th Street, had a slightly scandalous reputation and was known for a while as Little Coney Island. Then came Prohibition. The Lion Palace was torn down and replaced by what you see here, the Nemo Theater, which was probably named after Little Nemo, the hero of a popular comic strip of the early 20th century. That lasted as a movie theater until 1963, when it was converted into a supermarket. And if you don't remember it as a movie house, you might still remember it as a D'Agostino. It was torn down in the early 2000s and replaced by a Columbia University apartment building, which has an Asian supermarket at street level. Now, here we are a block down at 109th and Amsterdam. 109th and Broadway. And maybe there are some of you who remember Needix, which was a popular chain of fast food restaurants started by 2 guys named Neely and Dickinson. At its height, it had about 100 locations, mainly in the New York area. And its low-priced menu included hot dogs, coffee, donuts, and a signature drink distantly related to orange juice. It died out in the 1960s after competition from scrappier chains such as McDonald's. And the space is now part of a Chase Bank branch. Another brand name that was familiar to people, another restaurant chain, was Horn and Hardart. Although it began in Philadelphia, Horn and Hardart's automats achieved their greatest success in New York City. And at its height, H&H had about 50 self-service automats in the 5 boroughs, and they offered full meals and dessert for a handful of nickels. And films such as the 1937 Easy Living and the 1962 That Touch of Mink created and confirmed a popular conception of the automat as typical New York institution. And this former automat at 104th and Broadway, built in 1940, is one of 2 survivors of its type in Manhattan. It's now a city landmark. And as you see at the right, it now houses a city MD walk-in or urgent care center. Yet another familiar brand name or corporate name from 1940s was the F.W. Woolworth Company. This is the northwest corner of Broadway and 109th Street. The company was founded in 1879, and for most of the 20th century was the largest retailer, the early 20th century, it was the largest retailer in the United States. But eventually it gave way to scrappier retailers like, Corvettes and Walmart. And in response to that, Woolworths shuttered its traditional 5 and 10 cent stores and became a holding company for specialty stores. And in 2003, it took the name of its best known retail brand, Foot Locker. This former Woolworth store has seen many retail tenants, most recently a TD Bank. I think that space is empty now. On the right, you see what looks like a movie theater marquee. It is not, it was a supermarket, the Whitesacker Market, and we blew up the lettering on the marquee and found it advertised pure grape juice, fresh butterfish, and Coca-Cola all on sale. And on the right, you'll see that building, now cut down to 1 floor, is now a CVS, which is nominally a pharmacy, but in practice sells an awful lot of products that you would have found 80 years ago at a Woolworths. Here's what I found to be the most surprising of the pictures. In the 1930s, the developer Carlo Paterno, a member of a family that developed a lot of buildings in this neighborhood, purchased a rocky vacant lot on 107th Street. However, there was a covenant in the deed that required the first building on the lot to be a 1-family house. Not a very practical thing to do in 1937. But in response, the developer arranged to erect this little 1-story house, a prefab. Had been designed under a New Deal program to encourage improved housing for workers. The house had 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. Its architect, surprisingly, was William Van Allen, who at the time was already famous as the architect of the Chrysler Building. In the late 1940s, with the deed restrictions satisfied, the little house was removed, dismantled, and it was replaced by this 6-story apartment building, 7-story, I think, which was completed in 1950. Okay, and there we are. Hope you've enjoyed that jaunt into the past. And I'll turn you back to our host, Michael, if we had any questions accumulated.
Yeah, so we had a few. One of them was wondering how many, with so many buildings being gone, what do you think the total percentage is that has been demolished? And how many of these do you think would have been repurposed today?
You mean you mean the buildings? How many of the buildings that I've shown have been demolished?
No, I think you were talking about some previously before that had been demolished from the tax photos to now, I guess.
Demolished from the tax photos until, well, in the Bloomingdale area, our surprising number, actually the great majority of the buildings that existed in 1940 still exist. A lot of what I've shown have been buildings that have been demolished because they present the greatest contrast to what was there before. But if you want to see what, terms of what was there before and what's there now, you could go to the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group website and look at our database of Bloomingdale buildings, and you can actually see at least the estimated dates of original construction of virtually every building between 96 and 110 on the west side.
Got it. Does anyone have any other questions? Let's see. Someone asked if you know what the name of the Latin dance club on 96 and Broadway was.
Oh, I talked to somebody I know who was a customer of that club for a long time. It was called at one point, it just had a number, either 86 or 82. And then it was called the Broadway 96. And I don't remember what its latest. It went through a number of owners, a number of incarnations. But it was from the 70s until the early 2000s, it was a Latin dance club.
I don't see any further questions, but I think mine hasn't been refreshing. Let's see.
I see some hands up. I don't know if we go to them.
Yeah,
and then also there are some answered questions in the Q&A. I'm happy to answer anything.
Yeah, I'm having trouble connecting to the Q&A. It says it's disconnected. So if you can let me know if I missed anything. Or we can go to the hands.
Someone asked earlier, I might just elaborate on this, about Sarah said, it's clear the project, we talked about my presentation, took many steps in trial and error. How close is it to your final vision or to your initial vision? And I just want to talk a bit about like what else I could have done. I released this just because I thought it was good enough and I wanted to stop fiddling with it. And I'd been playing with it for like on and off on the weekends for 2 years. I just needed to get it out. I mean, honestly, like it's the long weekends or whenever I have time, but there's a lot more that like, if I had really put more time into it, there's more that I could have done. Some things, for instance, I would like to like use AI to colorize these photos at some point. I think I've seen some like tried to do that with some of the photos manually, and it's been pretty cool. I want to add the 80s photos. I started doing that over Thanksgiving, but I haven't gotten back to it. And I also was hoping to let people fix placement of photos when they're wrong, so just sort of crowdsource fixing some of the errors that are there. And another thing that I realized is since people have sent me lots of email about just stories about their area or what they remember, it would be cool to allow people to like comment on and tag the photos with their own stories, or even someone like Gil could add stories to the site. So I don't know if I ever have time to get back to this kind of stuff, but yeah, there's plenty more that could be done here.
So I am seeing, I'm having problems with my connections. Let me make you host. I think Sharon Lynch wants to talk or ask a question.
Okay. I'm the host? Okay, sure, I can do this. Sharon, I am letting you unmute your mic. If you want to unmute your mic and ask a question, go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was really curious. I'm a journalist by training, and so was curious about the methods used when you were talking about the Nedlicks, and I might have the name wrong. I couldn't quite see zooming in on the name of the building, but one of the last photographs when you were talking about the um, food outlet, the like sort of fast food or
Oh,
small
is that?
family
Oh,
restaurant. I was curious how you did your research on that in terms of finding out how many locations they had and what their menu was and that sort of thing. And also, if you would just repeat what their menu was, I'm just curious about those kinds of very day-to-day details.
can you hear me, Sharon?
I can.
Yeah. Well, regarding Nedick's, yeah, I was able to. Yeah, obviously, the photo is not very clear, but it is a Nedick's. It's clearly a Nedick's, and as to where as to Nedick's menu, I I'm old enough to have patronized Nedick's, and so that was from memory. But as far as the history of the corporation, I think I got that from a combination of Wikipedia and the Encyclopedia of New York City.
Encyclopedia of New York City. I have not heard of that before. Thank you.
Yeah, that was published in 1995.
Cool.
And I think there was a second edition around 2000. It was, well, anyway, it's around. I mean, you can find it in most libraries when we can get to libraries again.
Sure. Well, thank you for your work on this. I'm a relative newbie to the neighborhood. I've only been here 22 years, so.
Oh, I see. All right. Well, we'll forgive you. Okay, Sharon, thanks for the question.
All right, we have one from Ozzy who wanted to know where he can get more of this, the pictures. Julia, I think you mentioned it before in the database, but maybe you want to retype it on the chat.
Sorry, how do you get more pictures?
Well, he wanted to get access to the pictures so that he could, I guess, quote unquote, fix them or adjust them.
Oh, I don't know what he wants to do. I'm not taking requests to like fix individual photos. If there's a whole class of errors, like several blocks that are off or something that can be corrected in the process, then I would do that, but I haven't done that. I can't go manually fix a bunch of individual photos.
Is Ozzy asking about ordering photos from the ordering higher quality prints?
Sure. At the bottom of every photo, there's a little button to order, and it'll take you to right to the archive site and pre-fill the form, and then you can buy either a print or a high-quality digital download from the archives.
Yeah, they have 8 by 10, and they have 11 by 14.
Yep,
prints.
and a digital download. The other question about photos, I get a lot of people email me like, I can't find this photo, or someone in the chat just said like, where are the photos from 99th between Columbus and Central Park West? You can find those on the archive site. The process is to go to a tax map, figure out what the tax block number was, and then plug that into the original archive site, and you'll see all the photos. That's like the old manual way to do it if my site is saying the photos that you want.
Got it. Let's see. Do you have any more questions?
You can also email the municipal archives and they can help you out if you can't find something.
Someone asked if the photos are online and free.
These photos are property of the city of New York. Actually, they changed their license after I did my project. Their license was like very scary at first, and I just kind of went for it anyways. Now the license says that they encourage reuse, and I think they did that after I talked to them on it.
That is the low resolution photos. They're okay with these low resolution photos.
They're low resolution and they're watermarked. They say these
Yeah.
watermarks.
Mhm.
Right, but they're not free. They're technically, I mean, they're owned by the city if you want the full res.
Yeah, well, yeah. Mhm.
Well, I guess a personal question that I have is, what was one of your favorite buildings that you happened to come across?
I mean, I had that little slideshow at the beginning. I don't know if there was a particular favorite building. It's just the variety. When you get to see all of New York and to see like everything from Times Square and how crazy that is, and Fulton Mall and how crazy that is, and then you see these photos that are like families standing out in the yard far out in Queens, or
Yeah.
like what looks like empty land in like, lower Brooklyn. I think that's the most interesting thing.
I think we talked about the hats that people were wearing also, like just the different attires that they had.
Yeah. It seems like they mostly tried to avoid taking pictures of people, but sometimes they did, and I like this one. Yeah, I'm looking at this one now. I mean, this is the one that I use in the front of my site that's like of the plaza. I don't know. It's just like sometimes it's a great photo. Just like, these guys set out as tax people just to do something for the record, but some of these are really great photos. Someone asked in the chat, can you look at the high-res files without having to pay? No, I don't have those. I just use what was available on the site.
There was a question about if we know what year the building with Riverside and Riviera Theater were demolished.
Well, they were the Riverside was demolished first in the early 70s. And I think there was a hiatus, maybe even a couple of years. While this was a very controversial project, what turned out to be the Columbia Apartments. And there was litigation, and there was a lot of community opposition to it, especially the department store part. And it took a few years before they got to demolishing the northerly building, the one with the Riviera. But I think it was all done within the 1970s. And by the way, as part of the the negotiation with the community, the ultimate developers provided a community garden, which is on the roof of the garage, the project's garage, residential garage, which fronts on 97th Street. And there's actually public access to that. It's, I believe, on Sundays at certain times, but it's a garden operated by sort of an organization of gardening enthusiasts in the neighborhood. And that was part of the quid pro quo for the developer to get the building done.
I think Nancy also asked, let's see, do we know, where'd it go? 1 second. When did Woolworth's store at Broadway and 109th Street closed?
Well, I'm sorry, I can't answer that one. I think I'm pretty sure it was closed when I moved to the neighborhood in 1980.
Got it. All right, well, I guess we'll just go to people raising their hands if they still have their hands up. We'll call on them.
Sure. The next person with their hand up is George Below. George, if you want to talk, you can unmute your mic.
He might have also just had his hand up in the beginning to say hi.
Okay. We'll go next to Angel Roman then. Angel, I will let you talk if you unmute your mic.
Yeah, I was trying to find out how I can get photos of old facades. I've read about a Latin restaurant called La Rumba, in 1945, and but it's on 102nd Street in Broadway. It got demolished. I mean, in Amsterdam. So it's 845 Amsterdam. I think I went on the site, but it wasn't very clear. But I didn't know if anybody else takes photos of facades.
Well, so do you know, Angel, do you know whether it was a Latin restaurant in 1940?
Yes, it was. Well, I know 1945. It's an advertisement I saw that advertises. I'm going to be giving the talk on the 15th.
Yes,
So
yes,
there
I
were a group of
recognize your name,
sisters.
yeah. Mhm.
There was a group of sisters that performed on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Uh-huh.
So I have that video. I'm going to show that. But if I could show the facade of the place, that would be cool. So
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, if you,
that's all I know. It's a Dominican, actually Dominican owned.
yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know of any offhand outside of the 1940. Yeah, outside of what's on this site.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know that the Center for Puerto Rican Studies had a photographer donated, and he had to take photos of bodegas. And I don't know if that was for the tax purposes or that was just for their own association or not. But I haven't looked at that source, but that's not really a restaurant. But anyway,
Uh-huh.
thank you. Great program.
Thank you, Angel.
Thank you. There's one more hand up from Win Armstrong.
Yes.
You can go ahead.
A member of our history group. Well,
Great.
I'll just speak to a couple of things. For Angel, he might contact the BID, Peter Arnson, at Columbus, the Columbus Amsterdam BID, because they have a lot of pictures of some of the old stores. And I wanted to just mention that the Pasteur Institute is now 372 Central Park West, where Pam Tice lives. Not 380.
Oh, that's right. I was at the wrong end of the block.
Yeah.
Okay.
Susan Freedy had asked a question. Is she still there? Anyway, she asked a question about why there are only 3 buildings on what was 99th Street. And I can speak to that. 99th Street was closed off, and 97th to 100th Street between Central Park West and Columbus is now Park West Village, where there are just 4 large buildings. Actually, when that urban development plan for this area was executed, 37 acres were cleared off. 20 acres became Park West Village with 7 buildings on which runs from Central Park West, and there are 3 buildings on the Columbus Avenue side, and then the other 17 acres became, I think, the 17 buildings of Douglas Housing, which runs between 100th and 104th Street.
So an awful lot of lot numbers disappeared.
We have pictures of 100th Street and 99th Street and the list of residents. I was also going to mention that among the various history things that we have in the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group are who lived where. And boy, have the neighborhoods changed in terms of both economic and ethnic and nationalities and so forth. That's a fascinating story too, as well as not only the buildings, but who was inside the buildings.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm done.
thank you, Win. I don't think I see any more questions. Julian, do you see anything on the Q&A?
I see one hand. There's a lot in the Q&A, but a lot of them aren't questions. Ron asked, can you tell us anything about the 1940s incarnation of the former New York Cancer Hospital at 455 CBW?
Well, of course, in the late 1940s, after the war, it became the Towers Nursing Home. In the 1940s, the cancer hospital completed its move to the east side, where it's now known as Memorial Sloan Kettering. And then at some point in the late 40s, it came into the hands of a particularly sleazy nursing home operator by the name of Bernard Bergman. And later, and he operated it for quite a while, and then it became the subject of a big investigation by, oh, let me see, he was an assemblyman or Andrew Stein. Does that name ring any bell? I think he was later the president of the city council. In any case, he was a politician. He held a number of offices, and he led, I believe, while he was in the state senate, an investigation of really terrible conditions in city nursing homes, which led to a great overhaul of the regulations, and probably had a lot to do with raising of building and fire standards. And while those were laudable, that's probably what prompted a number of nursing homes to close, because it wasn't economically feasible to upgrade their buildings to the levels required by these new laws. Bernard Bergman later went to prison, but his malfeasance indirectly led to significant improvements in nursing home conditions. Does that sound right to you, Wynn?
She might be muted again.
Yeah.
I muted her because of the fire truck.
Okay. Yes, and if you remember, when it was after it was empty for many years, and in terrible shape, pigeons flying in and out of the windows and so forth, and a real fire trap. But when they finally started to become a condo, we had a session there before people moved in with the architect and everybody who'd been involved, including the new staff. It's a wonderful place. And when Columbia built their house right next door, the same architect that had served 3 developers who didn't go ahead with it really worked. They all hired the same architect, and he really took pains to match brick and to match the old styles of the architecture, so that the apartment building and the revised circular towers building, worked in harmony with each other. And if you go and look, you can see that. It's quite a special place.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I'd like to mention, if somebody really wants the ins and outs of what happened in the nursing home we have a wonderful report in our library collection with information that I think Rita has just put on our new library web called, what is it, omeka.com or mecca.org.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of Andrew Dalkart's students did a full report on the old nursing home and how it came to be and the building and so forth. It's a wonderful report. It's at Columbia, and we have a copy in our library collection.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And that may have been what made possible the effort to get the thing designated as a landmark.
Yeah. It is, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank
All
you
right.
for unmuting me.
Someone wanted to know, I guess, wait, what was it? Oh, I think Susan Friday wanted to have a chance to talk.
Yeah, Susan, I allow you to talk. If you want to unmute, you can go ahead.
Sure. I was just wanted to thank Wynn for responding to my question about West 99th Street. I'm very familiar with that whole history, and I'm just puzzled that the Julian, you sent me the link directly to the city archive for 99th Street, and it's got photos listed for all the buildings practically on the south side of the street, but not on the north side of the street. And I don't know why that would be. In 1940, there were dozens of buildings along the top of that.
So let's see. I tried to do some little quick research for you to try to figure out what block number that was. And I kind of guessed because it's gone now. Like if I look at it,
right.
If I look at a tax map now, that block, I mean, it's just one big block. So I tried to guess by just like trying the next number up. This was 1833. I tried 1834, and that's what I sent you. Maybe you should try 1835.
Yeah.
Since it's gone, I would have to poke around to see what that block is. You could try searching for an address and then seeing what the block number comes up as or something like that.
So I was just trying to check. You think those photos definitely do exist? The city did succeed in photographing every building in the city?
Yeah, pretty much. I know that's what they say.
Yeah, I'm sure there are probably a few.
Well, they also reached out to me and asked me to change on my site because I had said every building, and they said please say most because we're getting too many questions about buildings that are like missing. So I don't know, no promises, but close.
Right. I actually think I have a map someplace that shows the lots from the tax lots from those days. So I'll see if I can find that.
Well, I've got my old real estate atlas right here. Let me see if I can look it up.
Wow. You just happen to have that, huh?
Yeah, I just happen to have it. Now let me see. That's between the north side of 99th Street.
Between Columbus and Central Park West.
Block number 1835.
Ah, okay. Then I will check it out. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great presentation. Thank you all.
Well, I think we've run over quite a bit, haven't we?
Yes, we should. We are done, I believe. We answered most questions.
Yep. Now, Michael, has this been recorded? Will it be available?
Oh yeah, it's currently live on YouTube and will be posted. Should be finished uploading by tonight, so tomorrow morning it should be up on our YouTube page.
Great.
Also check the Bloomingdale Upper West Side History.org, and the link will also be there.
Bloomingdale Upper West Side History.org.
Not Bloomingdale. Sorry, our history group, Upper West Side.
Okay, our regular history group website.
I'll put it in the chat right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for attending and for sticking with us. And we hope you enjoyed this. And please, if you recall that there's been a couple of mentions of future programs in this series that you can learn about on our website. Once again, upperwestsidehistory.org. Okay, thank you.